This podcast provides information to help esports professionals identify and approach legal problems. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. Legal information is not the same as legal advice, which is an application of law to a party's specific set of circumstances.
You should not and are not authorized to use this podcast as a source of legal advice. And the information in this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between the Law of Esports podcast, any of the lawyers or affiliates of the podcast, and any consumer of this podcast.
Welcome to the Law of Esports podcast, the #1 podcast that discusses legal issues as they relate to the world of esports. My name is Jake Hicks, and I'm an attorney that represents teams, leagues, and organizations.
And my name is Nefi Lopez, and I'm an attorney that represents players, streamers, and personalities.
And today we have another installment in our Pro Ops series where we talk to professionals from across the spectrum of esports jobs and really the structure that makes this product so great for us to enjoy. And today we couldn't be more happy to introduce to you Miss Rebecca Longawa of Happy Warrior, and also the architect behind some of the greatest marriages between organizations, leagues, and brands that we know of today. Miss Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're too sweet. Thanks, Jakey.
We try.
I can't believe you guys do that every single episode. I thought that was all canned, but there you go. Just doing
No, it's live. We do it live.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
We do it live every time. It's ingrained now. I'm going to get it tattooed on my forearm.
As the eFuse kids would say, elite. That was very elite.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, look, we're really good at making an ad read sound natural. So if you have any friends in high places that want to go ahead and sponsor the podcast, we're always open to the discussion. So
all ears.
Yeah. I would say Manscaped, hairy razors, maybe some type of a protein shake.
I was about to say. Nefi and I are both looking a little bit scruffy right now.
Based on the stretch of both your shoulders. Yeah, start there, guys.
Awesome.
So for those that don't know what you do, will you just give us a quick description of what you do in your job in the esports industry?
Yeah. So, in esports, I'm independent. I do strategy within the esports ecosystem, whether that's working with agencies or media companies, directly with brands, teams and orgs, or investors, and really helping them figure out everything that I do anchors back to monetization. So what is the strategy, whether you're an investor, whether you're a team, whether you're a streamer or a brand, how are you going to insert yourself into this esports ecosystem in a way that's going to anchor back to making you money? I came from sports marketing and advertising. I worked in traditional sports, and money makes the world go round. So how do you figure out a way to really be, everybody uses the word authentic in this space. They overuse that word, but how do you really get into this space in a way that's going to affect your bottom line in a really meaningful way?
Yeah. Well, and monetization is huge, and without it, they wouldn't be able to pay lawyers.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't have the type of industry that we have today. But
yes.
Before we get further into the meat and potatoes of what you do on a daily basis, let's get to learn a little more about you, the person that is Rebecca. Where are you from, and how did you first get into the world of sports?
Well, I grew up on a little hobby farm on 57,000 acres of a national wildlife refuge in central Minnesota. I'm just like a dirty little kid that used to pick chicken crap out of the bottom of her shoes in elementary school. Like, I literally grew up in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota. I have always loved sports. It was literally the thing that connected my dad and myself from since my very early childhood. Hunter, fisherman. I love hiking and camping. I really enjoyed sitting and watching traditional sports with my dad. I remember having moments of thinking, quietly to myself, like watching broadcasters or like sideline reporters in football and thinking, I wish girls could do that, because like you just didn't see women in those roles. So I mean, I was in all the things. I like lived for middle school and high school. I was in a lot of sports. I was a cheerleader, just like very, very involved. Got into advertising and marketing very early in my career. And like, I mean, I would just say, like, by the grace of God, like one of my very first opportunities in my professional career was at an advertising agency that was very centered around FedEx. And they worked on FedEx's sponsorship of NFL and kart racing. And I was very entry level, 19 years old, working as a production coordinator. And that was really when my eyes were opened to what sports marketing and experiential marketing was all about. And I've kind of had a fire in my belly for that space ever since. And things have just kind of, I've just kind of rode the digital wave of innovation. When a lot of my friends were going to university, I went to the University of Minnesota for a little over a year. My dad was diagnosed with brain cancer, so I left school and I started working full time in advertising. So that's a bit about the grit of my background. I didn't finish college, but what I had that really rivaled anyone else my age was the really like the raw desire to like do epic. I'll just say like epic shit, epic work. Like I just wanted to do really cool stuff. I wanted to be a part of what the future held. I've been a pretty big risk taker throughout my entire career. And as digital started really evolving, I was fortunate being in an advertising environment, and I was able to evolve right along with it. Because I was so young, I was willing to lean in and just go for it, where very seasoned producers that I was working with were very comfortable in print production, and they weren't super comfortable taking on, at the time they called it interactive. It's basically what digital production is now, or digital media, but back then they called it interactive. And I just kept raising my hand and saying yes and figuring it out as I went along. And I've really done that throughout my career. I think risk taking and being agile is absolutely instrumental if you want to be on the cutting edge of technology and innovation holistically. So, I mean, that's really my origin story. I'm just a figure it out kind of a girl.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for kind of giving us sort of that rundown. I want to unpack that a little bit more, and for the listeners and the viewers that are watching this, just to kind of let you guys know, we actually met Rebecca earlier this year at some of the events. We seem to run into each other a lot, and obviously through the events, we kind of got to talking. We figured out, hey, what do you really do? And I remember we talked about, I think it was you, me, Hastro, Jake, and then there was one other guy. He kind of popped in for a little bit. He'd been drinking a little bit, having a good time that night, because I think that was towards the end of DreamHack over in Dallas, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a late night.
Yeah, it was a good time for sure.
I know who that was. I won't name him, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's probably a good call now. Now that I said he'd been drinking.
It was one of the homies though, for sure.
Yeah. And so somebody very influential, important in the scene. And, it's important for people to realize the makeup of the fabric of esports, right? The cloths that are interwoven kind of depend on each other for it to be held together. And people think that esports is all about gamers, it's all about streamers, it's all about these orgs, when in reality, it's a lot more complex than that. And so the reason why I tell that's to highlight the importance of the role that people like you play, that comes into things like marketing, things like sort of financing or sponsorships or brand deals, which are probably one of the most important facets, and it's what makes the esports world go around. And without it, we wouldn't have what we have, and players wouldn't be getting paid, and tournaments wouldn't be getting funded. And so it's awesome to see that you went from such a small town in Minnesota, and I've been in Minnesota, and the countryside is beautiful. um, and see you grow into where you're now, and see how many things you're involved in. And so let's talk about kind of that early on, right? You started working for a company. You're involved with the FedEx/NASCAR deal as an entry level associate. At what point did you sort of start to climb that ladder, that corporate ladder, to allow you to do those epic things that you want to do so bad?
Yeah. So, I mean, admittingly, I was super comfortable at the agency that I was at, which was called Hanley Wood, and Hanley Wood is like an OG publisher, but they had this offshoot, this arm that worked very closely with FedEx. They worked on like annual reports, a lot of film and photo shoots. As I said, the sponsorship of NFL and kart racing, it was very much about building loyalty and increasing monetization through, like, I mean, I would call it trinkets and trash. Like, how can you incentivize people to, how do you isolate decision makers within organizations and then entice them to make a decision that ultimately they can make? So if you're at a law firm and there's a Pitney Bowes shipping center within your law firm, that office manager at Pitney Bowes, they can ship at that time, like through DHL or FedEx or UPS or whomever, But if you can give them skin in the game and create a loyalty program that ties back to them personally, then they're going to choose your brand over others, because then they have the opportunity to, spend more, win more, and they're not spending their own money. So that was like a big eye opener to me, because I hadn't really understood the intricacies of strategy. And that program year over year was able to bring in, millions of dollars of increased revenue within this test market for FedEx. And I was quite young. I mean, I'm talking 19 to 22 years old. Then I left that agency, and I would say the biggest difference maker for me was my first really big risk. So I'm in a super comfortable place. I'm in a really comfortable position with an advertising creative agency that is owned by a conglomerate publication, Hanley Wood. They do a lot of like construction and all these pubs. Like, it's a total publication company. It is massive. And I'm sitting quite pretty. I'm a single mom. I've got my daughter, Sydney, at the time, who's like a baby. But I was given the opportunity to take a super big risk and go to an all digital agency in the basement of a warehouse in now what is North Loop, Minneapolis, which at the time we just called it the warehouse district in Minneapolis, with one of the smartest people that I ever met. He was a writer at Fallon Agency, one of the top agencies in the entire country, that took a loan from his dad for $20,000 to build out an all digital agency. And I had lunch with him. I met him through a developer that was a freelancer for me at Hanley Wood. And I was just like, let's just go, right? Let's just go. Let's just build it. Let's do it. So what I was able to learn at a very seasoned agency was process, protocol, documentation, tracking. I brought all of that thought leadership that I had learned over 4 years along with me, and we used that to inform how this new all digital agency, and this was like 2004. Like, this was not when people were taking big risks in web. Like, I remember being at Space 150, and they're still around and they're elite. They do amazing, very innovative work still to this day. They're always pushing the envelope. But I remember calling people about like building them a website, and these old timers, these old dudes would be like, I don't need a website. I'm in the yellow pages. I've got a full page ad, right? Like, that's where the mindset was. Like, that is literally how long I've been in where digital has been. So when people are trying to understand the passion and purpose around building out esports and gaming ecosystems over the past 5 years here, it's like, yeah, I had to convince people to get a website. I had to convince the Timberwolves to build out intentional social media strategy. It took players to build out social media strategy and overpass the entire ecosystem and do breaking news before PR could push it out for the NBA and the NFL and the NHL to care about social media. It was the power of the players building out their personal brands. So I've been a part of Web 1, Web 2. Now we're into Web 3, the gaming ecosystem. Like there's Sheryl Sandberg said it a few years ago. Like if somebody would have asked her where you see yourself in 5 years, it wasn't invented yet. That is kind of the gritty line that is the risk in which I want to live my life. Is there ebbs and flows to that? Do I have like super hot years of making money and then years where I'm trying to convince people that like esports is gonna be a thing or social media is worth investing in? Yeah, I think that is every disruptor. If you listen to Gary Vee, like every disruptor, every innovator goes through those ebbs and flows of you can visualize and picture it as an ideator first. But it's the brands. It's not the fear of missing out. It's the cost of missing out. It's the organizations, the brands, and the companies that aren't willing to take the risk early on, that the barrier to entry by the time that the entire mainstream believes in it and they're comfortable, they can't even get there. They can't even get in. It just costs too much. So, yeah. I mean, I've always been very, very bullish on doing whatever is next. And I would say my time at Space 150 with just like the nuttiest innovators and the craziest people that I've ever worked with that are just like pushing barriers has made me very ballsy into going after what is next, what is cool, regardless of any money in my pocket. And I recently was listening to like this motivational podcast. I listen to that a lot in the morning, like on the YouTube or whatever. And it was like the guy was talking to someone else and he said, how much money did you first sell your dreams for? And the other guy was like, $27,000 annual salary.
Yeah,
and I've never wanted to be the person who sells what they aspire to be or what they envision or what they dream for just a baseline boring salary, whether it's $27,000 or $275,000. I'm not into that, right? Like you just got to go after what puts a fire in your belly. And that for me is what drives me every single day.
So when you're at the Timberwolves and you're, or you know, as you can move along in your career and you're trying to convince people to build out this strategy that includes social media, nowadays that sounds like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, people forget that we had things like Zynga and Friendster and MySpace and social media components that were not successful, that people weren't using, and that caused a lot of people to not believe in that strategy. Yeah. What made you decide to pick something like social media and go after it with a giant brand like the Timberwolves in the NBA?
I mean, it was really player driven. And I think one of the biggest moments in social media sports history is Kevin Love. And I don't remember what talk show it's on, but it is. You can probably find it. But so if you think about the way communication strategy used to happen in traditional sports, the team would make a decision about something big that affected players. They'd make the decision and they would literally get on the phone and start calling individual players, whether it was the GM or the coach or the ownership group or the president of an organization. And they would call every single player on the roster and just let them know, right? Like this news is going to break. This news is going to break. And this particular news, I believe, was possibly Kevin McHale leaving. I think he was an interim coach and he was leaving. I might be wrong on that exact detail, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And so someone within the high up in the organization was calling all of the players and letting them know that this big change was happening. That call went to Kevin Love. Kevin tweeted the news. There were no restrictions. There was no barriers. He just did what was natural for all of these young kids to do at the time, which was tell their social media, right? That there was something happening that was different. So it created, as you can imagine, quite a stir. The team had not prepared a press release. It hadn't been brought to the media. And it was like the tweet heard around the world. I can't believe that. Like, they should talk about this in like school at this point, because it literally changed the fabric of how the NBA deals with social media strategy. They had to create barriers, guardrails, rules, and regulations around how players are engaging with sensitive information. And it really goes back to the miss of an organization of understanding the power of social media. And I think what so many sports teams started to understand between 2011 and 2016 was the power of individual brands. And we could go on and on about how teams really guardrail their players and hold them a bit hostage to their own schedules in order for the organization and then ultimately the league to own some of those brand dollars. But the power was really in these voices of the players. Because if you think about the history of how players and personalities holistically, and this even goes to how streamers now engage, if you think about the power, it started with what they would call like a brand endorsement. So you're holding up like a Folgers coffee or whatever you're holding up, and you're like, when I'm tired in the morning, I'm going to drink Folgers coffee and it's getting me through my day. Game on, right? But then it's like, that's like some baked in deal, and you like stand in front of a camera and you spend 6 hours in a studio on a green screen or a backdrop, and you read your lines and you do your thing. Then you get into the social media range of the world in the mid 2010s to 2000 and early 2020s, and what we have had over the past 12 years is players and personalities talking actually from their gut of what they're really into. They've got the power, because the reason why endorsements mattered in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s is people are so interested in what personalities these individuals care about and believe in. So now you're removing an entire thick layer, like peel 10 layers off an onion to almost the core. And now you have individuals that are talking about what they really love, what they really believe in, what they're really seeing, what they're really experiencing, quite real time. And individuals can comment, and that personality can comment back. Now you get into esports and gaming, and it's real time. Now it's a conversation. Now it's a conversation where in the real time you're commenting and they might shout you out. That is the power and the difference between traditional sports and social media strategy, and where the power of streaming and live streaming really comes into play. It's creating an even a thinner barrier. Now you are a part of the conversation. And Jake, when you were on my podcast, we talked about the risk reward of that, right? When you get traditional athletes coming into that space and they're not used to being always on, they're not used to being able to filter themselves, that it puts them at greater risk. But from a fan perspective, it just creates this hyper connectivity and this always on approach. But, going back to 2014, 2011, 12, 13, 14, when I was working with the Timberwolves, it really was about pay attention to the power in which you can leverage this talent to be a voice for your brand and cultivate a message that is truly authentic and just give a peek. It's like the Wizard of Oz, like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Like, let's just take a peek behind the curtain. Like, what is behind that curtain? What is the reality? And then how do you create foundational brand relevance or brand personality, whether the brand is an entity like a sports team or an esports org, or it's that actual individual. There's so many layers within that. Like, how can that individual be multifaceted to lean in even deeper on their personal brand story, that any not only any fan, but any potential brand can take a look at your social and within 45 to 90 seconds understand what you're all about, what you love, what you're into, have a holistic picture of you as an individual, and decide whether or not they want to engage with you and their product being associated with you. It's a pretty powerful space to be, but it comes with a lot of responsibility.
Okay. So it sounds like we're sort of starting to spill over into the value that esports has for a lot of these sponsors and a lot of these brands. Let's kind of pause a little bit and talk about your sort of first interaction or engagement, or what's the word I'm looking for? The first deal you ever had where you're like, holy crap, esports is really something that these brands should really care about. When did you realize that?
Yeah. Well, my first intersection into esports was more on the technology side of esports, and it was with Rival.ai. So when I was with Stadia Ventures, we were really evaluating sports tech and media technology, entertainment technology companies for investment for, global investors. And we started seeing these esports platforms coming and looking for investment, which really got my antenna going on, like, what is this all about? I already knew a bit. I mean, I was working with an experiential agency that was doing some really cool activations with ESL and Totino's Pizza Rolls. I worked with a buddy of mine who has an agency called Superhuman, also based in Minneapolis, and he was a huge Overwatch player, and he was really interested in player development. And like, if Overwatch comes to Minnesota, which it didn't franchise here, but he's like, if Overwatch comes to Minnesota, like, we gotta like talk to these players about player development. Like, so much about player development and monetization for players specifically in traditional sports, and there's so much room there. So I was kind of learning and really interested in how esports can get into the broader ecosystem in the US, right? But the big pivot for me was COVID. I was working with traditional athletes. I was working in the live event space. COVID happened. I was already very, very well entrenched in what Brett Diamond and the team at the Minnesota Rocker at the time was doing here in my home market area. And when COVID happened, it was like, how are we going to build out an all digital approach? Super passionate about the space. I feel like I can articulate it in a way that brands understand. And it really just happened organically. Some of my very first conversations when it comes to brand deals in version 1 was having conversations with USAA. And it all comes down to understanding what is in it for the brand. And USAA was a really interesting conversation because I was talking to 160over90, which was their brand agency at the time. And as they were talking about what mattered to USAA, I started asking the team at Rocker about really deep insights into every single one of our players, which I learned when I was at the Timberwolves, right? So what I discovered was Mike, Major Maniac, his dad was a colonel in the U.S. Army, and they were USAA members. This kid was like a unicorn. He was like the golden goose. I literally built the entire pitch around being able to create very unique content with someone who understood the value, the personality, and the value of what USAA has to bring to the entire ecosystem and community. And it just, like, that just almost fell into my lap, right? Of having those conversations. And as we dug in a little bit deeper, it just was a beautiful brand fit. Minnesota Rocker was already building out what they call their Rocker Regiment. They were already leaning into the Minnesota National Guard and sending out what they call their Rocker Regiment packages to the National Guardsmen wherever they happen to be stationed, and really leaning into the Call of Duty / Minnesota National Guard crossover. So it just made perfect sense. Like, they were already doing all the right things. It was just kind of putting a bow on it with one particular player on their Call of Duty team that had a very organic tie-in to the USAA family. And then from that point forward, in my conversations with Brett Diamond and that organization, you know, for me to be able to tell the story of what that organization, and as they evolved to version 1, it just made sense. Like, I mean, I'm very much ingrained in the story of what we've built here in Minnesota and extremely passionate about it. And I'm beyond, like, embarrassingly loyal to everything that org does. Like, I mean, I'm like a kid in the candy store with everything that org does. I feel like they do everything right, and I'm extremely passionate about it. So it's just second nature for me to talk about it. But over the years, in deciding and declaring myself into the esports ecosystem once COVID hit, that's when the momentum really started for me in this industry when it comes to the non-endemic consumer brands that are interested in esports, really looking to me to help them get into this space. It really just started with me sharing the knowledge that I was learning along the way. And I think if anybody tells you that they're an expert in esports, they're an expert in the gaming industry, they're full of crap, because there's absolutely no way it moves. Did you just hear my kid belch through that microphone? Roman! Did you hear it? I hope you did.
We heard a little bit of it.
It's beyond offensive.
What?
But anyways.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
I think, like, this is called living in a content house of a bunch of 16 to 22-year-olds. I think the biggest thing, like, is about understanding where the industry is going and being able to help brands come into it with authenticity. So for me, when brands see the content that I was pushing out on LinkedIn and sharing and my viewpoint, I became a thought leader, but I would never call myself an expert. There's just no way. It moves too quickly. Like, I mean, the people that you guys interview on your podcast that I'm learning from, I'm always blown away. I'm like, I'm literally drinking from a fire hose at every single episode you guys have, because you're talking to so many innovators in the space that are doing things from a totally different lens than I'm looking at things through. Like, I'm looking at things through a very specific lens, and I understand that, and I appreciate it, and I respect it. But that's the lens that I'm looking at the world through in esports and gaming. I understand the business of esports. I used to understand at a very high level the business of basketball. Right. Did I play basketball? Was I in the WNBA? No. But I understand the business of basketball. I understand the business of esports and gaming. And I think that's really the place in which more people need to understand and recognize. Like, you don't have to know everything about everything. I think a lot of people are on the fringe, being a little bit afraid to get into this space. I declared myself in this space. I literally was like applying for things right before COVID hit, I was like, this is it. This is where I am. This is where I'm working. It's where I'm at.
I think that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it for sure.
In that same vein, when it comes to people that are entering the space for the first time, a lot of times when it comes to monetization in esports and working with brands, you have two categories that most brands fall into for the most part, and that is endemic brands and non-endemic brands. And so for the listeners out there, when we talk about endemic brands, we talk about companies that have been in gaming kind of from the beginning. Your Mountain Dews, your Red Bulls, Lay's, Doritos, like chip companies, Totino's Pizza Rolls, that kind of thing. But for non-endemic brands, that's where a lot of work has to happen. And, for the listener out there that doesn't know, you've been very successful, Rebecca, in bringing non-endemic brands to the space, specifically for certain organizations out there, for example, like Version 1. And we know that recently that you assisted Version 1 in obtaining a Bush's Baked Beans relationship and a monetized relationship. But a lot of people have no idea how that really happens. And so thank you for listening to our podcast, because we have talked to a lot of people like Mike Ken at Decerto, Nabil Pervez at AOE, Justin Kenna at GameSquare, that talk about different aspects of the business, but we haven't really talked to anyone that brings in non-endemic brands and convinces them that esports is a great place to be. So kind of through that lens, will you walk us through how those deals happen?
Yeah. And I would say it really depends on the organization that you're talking to. And when you're talking to a non-endemic brand, it's the long game. I mean, it's really about nurturing a relationship and not thinking about a sale. Conversations that I've had with brands like Schwann's and Bush's were really about what is in the best interest of a brand like Schwann's and a brand like Bush's. It's not necessarily thinking about...
Well, when you say Schwann's, you're talking about the company that makes the brands that we love, like Pagoda egg rolls.
Pagoda egg rolls, Freshetta pizza, Edwards pies, Red Baron, right? Like Schwann's is your go to the grocery store and look through the frozen section. So where's the low hanging fruit, and where has, like, first of all, I'm just gonna be super candid. Like, where have non-endemic brands like done an injustice to the entire ecosystem of esports? It's those early brands that you talked about, right? The energy drinks, the salty snacks, the things that aren't necessarily good for you. Those brands have really high. Like, if you take a look at Coca-Cola, for example, 80% of their budget goes towards marketing. Why does a brand like Coca-Cola have to spend 80% of their budget in marketing? It's because it's not good for you to drink Coca-Cola. Sorry, I love it. Actually, I used to be addicted to it. I used to literally go to McDonald's and buy like $1 Coca-Cola.
I was gonna say,
drink it and drop it in the school lobby before my kids knew that I was at McDonald's and drinking a Coke, because McDonald's Coke is the best Coke. But anyways, I digress.
I agree.
Brands that aren't necessarily the best for you to consume are going to be early to any emerging sport, right? So the brands that are what are you drinking? Like a C4 protein?
This is a C4.
What are you drinking?
It's it's the C4 Smart brand. I can't say that we're not sponsored by C4, but lawyers drink caffeine in a variety of different ways.
I drink C4 in the morning. I'm not saying that I'm against it, but it's probably not the best thing we should be drinking. You shouldn't be drinking it at 8:26 p.m.
Which, by the way, those C4 guys should get into the esports scene, by the way. I don't think they are, which I scratch my head.
I'd be happy if they did. They're started out in Texas. We'd be happy if we could chat with them, but at the same time.
C4, if you're listening.
No, and it's funny because I went to college with the one of the higher marketing guy, or not even marketing. I think it's partnerships or something like that. He's up there, and I doubt he's listening to this, but I might have to talk to him. But I've tried early on.
Who's going to be early in?
But
I mean, who's going to be early in are the things that a consumer probably, it's not in their best interest to be consuming. That's always what's early in. We're grateful for those brands. Fucking bow down to those brands. I'm not going to complain. because they actually help keep the lights on very early on within our industry. But what we're starting to see is a trend of consumer product goods, the non-endemic brands. And a non-endemic brand is a brand that is not necessarily dependent on gaming and esports in order to make their world go round. An endemic brand would be like the microphone I'm talking into, the keyboard that I'm typing into, the headphones that Neffy's wearing. That's an endemic brand, right? My Respawn chair, an endemic brand. The non-endemic brands are the things that a car company, an insurance company. You look at services and consumer product goods that are not dependent on the industry, but they'll definitely benefit from broadening their horizon and getting into this industry. What we're starting to see really happen in esports, which is exciting, is these non-endemic brands that are very focused on health. So a Bush's Baked Beans. Beans are high in protein. They really kind of hit every single box of the next generation of consumer. If you think about a Bush's Baked Beans, the preservatives, there are no preservatives. The canning process is the preservatives in a product like beans. They're very, very high in protein. Chickpeas or garbanzo beans or whatever you choose to call them can adopt any flavor profile. So they're good in a smoothie. You can open a can of garbanzo beans. They're good in a smoothie. You can put them into a pizza crust. You can put them into a soup. Like, you can do so many things with chickpeas. They turn into hummus. Like, that's with the base of a hummus, right? And you take a look at a brand like Bush's Baked Beans, which has been a family-owned brand for over 200 years. Their average consumer is in their 60s. And how is a brand like Bush's Baked Beans going to reach the next generation of consumers? Having conversations with them through one of their nonprofits really led me to think about, I'm having a conversation with them about Gen Z, but really it's like, for me, it's like, why don't you just meet Gen Z where they already are? 87% of Gen Z is playing video games. By 2030, Gen Z is going to have the full transfer of wealth from the boomer generation into their hands. They're going to have the most wealth on earth. Like, they're going to have it. They're going to own the total amount of net worth in the world by 2030. How are you going to build brand relevance with them now? And if you think about any listener here, when you were in middle school, you're making your buyer decisions between, if you're a girl, between Secret and Degree, or if you're a guy, between like Axe body spray and whatever trash piece of garbage you want to smell like. Your Pepsi versus Coke, your 7-Up versus your Sprite, your Doritos versus your whatever else. You're making those brand decisions while you are within that middle school through college timeframe of your life. So how, as a brand, are you going to be relevant at this very critical moment in time with Gen Z? You have to insert yourself in a way that is relevant and viable so that they can see that you believe in what they believe in, like the Simon Sinek way, that you value the interests that they're interested in. So how do you meet Gen Z where they already are? 87% of them are playing video games. Get them where they already are. You don't have to create your own narrative and entice and encourage them to find you where you are. You meet them where they already are. And that truly, I think, is the power of having conversations with legacy brands and getting them to go all in on the esports and gaming ecosystem, is allowing them to trust the process and work collaboratively with teams and orgs. Like, Version 1 has just done a really phenomenal job with Bush's Baked Beans. They've got, Calm, who's one of their Rocket League players, whose dad is a chef, and Calm loves to cook. So it just was natural for Bush's Baked Beans to send over some of their top seeded recipes that they've done year over year with top chefs, and have Calm build out a content series that recreates these already proven recipes that they know people love. Like, people love the black bean brownies, for example, and he can recreate this recipe in studio on site and create a really cool content series. And it literally ties back to who Calm is, because his dad is a chef at a 5-star restaurant, and he knows how to cook, and it just feels organic, and he's just like the sweetest, cutest, goofy kid you've ever met in your life. And it just comes across feeling very, very credible and authentic. And that's what it's all about. So having conversation with Bush's, it's like, where do you see your brand going? What are your gaps? What are you trying to do? How do we get you into more colleges and universities? It's a collegiate tournament. Let's work with Collegiate Rocket League on the summer series. Let's get your numbers up. Let's create super cool custom content with somebody like Calm at V1. And like, let's just build the story. It's not throwing a ton of money into a logo slap. It's really thinking about things in a way that anchors back from the brand perspective of bringing in a pro org for credibility, creating authentic content with somebody like Calm, and then anchoring it back to monetization, which is aligning Bush's sales team with colleges and universities, food catering programs within those universities that are participating in an invitational. So you have to go a little bit deep. You can't just be super plug and play surface. You have to listen to these brand partners and really understand what success looks like for them, and then work through a deal flow that hits every single layer and level, that makes them feel heard and seen.
Okay. And obviously you kind of gave us sort of a cursory view of the value that esports and the generation that are currently involved in esports and video games and live streaming, the value that they have to not just endemic but also primarily non-endemic brands. And I don't know what the what the correct term would be, but what about giving advice, right, towards either content creators? Because you sort of gave us like a mini pitch, like, hey, look, guys, Bush Beans, this is the value that this generation and that this particular ecosystem of esports and video games has to you. What advice would you give to content creators or streamers, or even player managers that are in charge of getting these deals? How would you recommend they sort of pitch themselves, or what are some things that you've learned over the years that brands want to hear and they care about, so that way they would be more likely to sign that check to sponsor, to promote whatever it is that they're selling on your brand?
I think first of all, they need to have a holistic understanding of like who you are as a creator, and that goes down to brand pillars. Like, first of all, who are you as a creator, and what kind of content are you producing? But like, who are your friends and family? What are your hobbies? How are you spending your time? Like, what are you really truly interested in outside of gaming? And finally, from a charitable aspect, which I think is very underrepresented within our entire ecosystem, like, what are you passionate about, and what kind of change do you want to make in the world? You can combine those 4 things together. So, whether you're an athlete or an entertainer or a streamer, your friends and your family, your hobbies, and then where your social impact really lies. those 4 things, think about those as the foundation of what you're building everything you do upon, and then balance your content across all 4 of those pillars so that any brand can kind of scroll through your content and see what you're all about rather quickly and determine whether or not you kind of, ring their bell or like hit upon the things that they also believe in. One of the things that I talk about quite frequently is being willing to share the things that you're really passionate about and working with brands for free up front, because they also like maybe they have something in it for you. So like, let's just pretend that you're really into riding ATVs. Right? You're like in a little side by side and you have like an old school Polaris. Like, go ahead and ride your ATV and create your content, but then you should be documenting that and feeding it back to the brand in which you really love. Maybe they're going to send you the most recent ATV that they've got, or, whatever it is that you're into, that is your hobby. Like, there's a lot of room there for exploration, that you can start curating content and tagging them in that, and let the long game be there. And I've said it for like 4 years, and it's probably super cheesy, but who's super good at creating really good brand deals are like the pageant girls who travel all over the United States and like compete in beauty pageants. Like, they don't pay for anything. They will literally go to whatever, like the local meat market and the hardware store and the insurance company and the tanning salon and the hair place and the local makeup artist. And like, they will literally get their travel paid for. Like, look around your neighborhood. I talk to streamers that are up and coming, and I'm like, who do your parents know? Who's in your personal ecosystem? What small businesses within your family ties are able to give you no money, but brand logos and commercials that you can start building into your streaming strategy to prove out how you execute? So let's just say that you've got 5 brand partners. No one's giving you any dollars, right? However, what you're given is content that you can layer into your stream that's replaceable as soon as somebody's going to give you money. So now you have the example. Now you can build out a brand deck. Now you can build out a sales sheet. Now you can say, this particular brand, whatever, Randy's Meat Shop, that might just be in your local fucking neighborhood, has how many impressions during your live stream, right? It might not be Randy's like home market area per se that's watching, but you have this data and you have the stats, and you can now sell that to a larger brand. Now you're selling to a regional brand. Then you're selling it to a national brand. I think so many creators in this space are comparing themselves to freaking Ninja, and they're like, only wanted my face on a blah. You're like, you're not that guy. So you're not that guy right now, but who are you? Like, who are you in your neighborhood? Like, look around you. Like, how can you build out relevance where you already are to prove out the metrics that you can go a little bit higher and a little bit deeper and a little bit higher and a little bit deeper, but being authentic to who you are? So it might be like some company that your dad's buddies with, or your mom works for, or your neighbor owns. But like, I mean, don't sleep on the freaking pageant girls, because those girls got it. Yeah. They've got it locked in. They know how to wheel and deal and get things done, so they can travel all over and like get their face out there. And I think a lot of times in this industry, gamers want to pay for nothing and they want everything in return. And it's like, how are you going to build your own relevance in order to prove that you're worth it? So prove that your metrics are there, prove that you're worth it. and then the bigger deals are going to come. But you can't underscore documenting and putting that hard work in and building out layers and layers of representation within your stream while you're just starting out. Like, you have to show another brand what it's going to look like for them. So give it away. I mean, I'm all about that.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that. I actually have a cousin of mine, and actually she's a niece. It's my cousin's daughter, who's a teen. I think she's Miss Webb County, which is South Texas. It's in Laredo.
Is she a pageant girl?
She is a pageant girl, and she went to Miss Teen USA and competed, and and now that you say, you're absolutely right, because I remember getting a little form where she's like, "Hey, will you sponsor me so you can pay for my travel?" And I looked at the list of sponsors, and it was a bunch of local people and like local businesses. I mean, you're absolutely right, and it's crazy.
Yeah.
But I've actually seen it happen. So for the guys that I work with and the guys that I represent, I know, and because I've seen it firsthand, non-endemic brands will reach out to them whenever they're organically interacting and posting their stuff. Like, I remember I have a guy that bought a house, moved in, was building a bunch of furniture, was putting all this stuff together. And, he's kind of the type of guy that if he buys something, it all has to be the same brand and the same, just match. And that brand happened to be DeWalt, or DeWalt, however you pronounce it, which is, DeWalt,
DeWalt.
which is
You say DeWalt.
Yeah, DeWalt. It depends on who you ask. And I mean, he like took a photo that non-sponsored, and and posted on his Twitter, and obviously the guy's pretty big on Twitter. And they said, "Hey, thank you so much for sharing our brand. Here's some stuff." And they sent him more stuff, and they have a relationship now that we've been able to nurture over the years. And there's a fine line, right? There's that organic. Whenever you say free, I want people to understand that doesn't necessarily mean have brands reach out to you all the time and ask you to do stuff for them for free. I think what you mean by free is brands that you organically already use and you're a fan of, create content with it and post it and see how. And I know Jake and I have seen it firsthand with brands that we've shared. Like an example, we have this ice shaker bottle. I love ice shaker bottles, by the way. This one in particular was Spartan, who's one of our favorite Halo players, who's got to deal with Advanced. We took a picture with this particular bottle. We posted it. Jake and I have a very small following on Twitter in particular, which is where we really post a lot of our content. And we're friends with a lot of content creators, and a lot of them were liking it. And you know how Twitter, how the algorithm works. If a creator likes it, then their followers see that they liked it, and then their followers like it, and it's sort of a snowball effect. And Spartan liked it. A few of the guys that we work with and a few of our friends liked it. And it somehow got to the Advanced guys. And they ended up following us on Twitter, and we really haven't interacted with them too much just because we don't want to force it. But that in and of itself, and we just did it. We did it more because we wanted to share this logo, but obviously this logo, the Advanced logo, made it into the shot, and they saw it, and they're like, "Oh, we like what you guys do," and they followed us on Twitter, and presumably, I'm sure they probably listen in and out on some of the episodes. But
I bet they're soaking this one in. They can't.
They're because I'm shouting them out, and I like their product genuinely. Advanced, I think, does some cool stuff.
Good.
But that is an example where you're organically, and we just did it to shout out the creator, and it's, and they're sort of intertwined with all kinds of other brands, and I've seen creators do it.
I mean, I would say, like, there's layers to where the creators are in their journey. Like, some people that I talk to, never have had a brand deal ever, right? They're just trying to figure it out. Like, those are the people that I'm like imploring to look in their neighborhood. Right?
Yeah.
Like, these are the people in your neighborhood. Like, that's like Mr. Rogers' way. Obviously, there's well-established creators that are looking to level up their brand deals. That just comes down to understanding how you position yourself, whether it's a 2 or 3 pager, and show your combined following, who's engaging with you, where you have your traction, what you believe in, and being really transparent around what you're trying to build. I work with Nubzer, who is a streamer in Minnesota. He's born with he calls himself, the one-armed gamer, the one-handed gamer. He was born with a deformity on his right arm, only developed so far, hence the name Nubzer. And for him, it's like, how can he build out a narrative around disabled gamers and inclusivity and adaptable hardware, adaptable tech, right? Like, it all comes down to your personal brand and your personal story.
Right.
And how you lean into that and how are you going to monetize that? I think there's no blanketed answer for everybody. But there are cues you can take and there are steps you can take to think about you foundationally as an athlete or an influencer or a creator, that really anchors back to like what you believe in, what you're passionate about. Like you said, the things that you're personally invested in that you can showcase, and then you build upon that. And
Right.
there's brands that are going to see that and believe in you. But doing nothing does nothing.
Right. Now,
Well,
let me ask you this,
that-
Rebecca, and Jake, and I know
Yeah.
Rebecca was making fun of me earlier because I'm the king of interjecting and interrupting. Just as sort of as a short response, do you normally encourage creators to reach out to these sponsors, or like how would you get that conversation started? On your experience, where have you seen that it works? Do you have creators or their managers reach out to specific titles within brands, or how does that conversation get started in your experience? Is the best way to do that?
I mean, I think having a brand manager is integral. Having someone who is intentionally just reaching out, and you have to start what you are passionate about first, where you're already authentically engaging in first, right? Like the C4 energy drinks with Jake and, bamboo suits and, whatever. I don't know what else.
Like,
I don't know what else.
like it.
Jake's
I don't
into.
drink, so Liquid Death, if you're listening.
Oh yeah, Liquid Death is a big
Yeah,
one for a
Liquid
nephew.
Death.
I have like 10
think
cases of it in my garage. So I love it.
I think what's really powerful is like doing an audit around you of things that you're already passionate about. But if a full-time content creator is doing brand outreach, you're not a full-time content creator. Like, you kind of need somebody. And I don't judge who that person is. Like, sometimes it's somebody you grew up with. Sometimes it is your wealth management team's person. Sometimes it's like your
Sometimes
kid,
it's people like me and Jake,
your
by the way.
brother. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's Neffy and Jake, like whoever it may be. Who's going to tell your story for you? Who do you believe is a good voice for your brand? That takes some discernment, right? But it's just got to be somebody who can like repeat and get in front of brands. I think authenticity really matters and credibility matters. So I really like to start with the things that you're really into. I mean, if anybody came into my life, it is a hodgepodge of like gala gowns and Carhartt and, like there's no in between. It's like, what are we going to do this weekend? Are we going to like go to a gala and look like a princess, or are we going to, take down a few ducks and geese and, make a delicious dinner? You just don't know. You don't know. It's just a hodgepodge of surprise. But I mean, I've worked with NFL players who are really, really into specific brands that they lean into, whether it's Matthew Bowes or Polaris side-by-sides or ATVs. And they've been able to curate that into brand deals because they just saturate their content with it without anything in return, because it really, really, really is who they are, right? So, be authentic to who you are, lean into the brands that you love, and those brands hopefully will reward you, but don't do it with an expectation of anything in return. And I think that's really the key here, is being who you are and leaning into the things that you're passionate about. Like, I'm probably passionate about like 30 brands, 40 brands. Like, I'm passionate about them. I'm like loyal to a lot of things. If you like did a sweep of my house, I would be loyal to specific things. I'm not expecting every single one of them to lean back into me from a monetization standpoint, but I would love for 10% of them to come back to me for that. If I was on stream all day, which I'm not, right? Like, I kind of live below the radar. I kind of like to be under the radar. But you have to like really be honest about like what rings your own bell, and then how do you live that out and let the brand discover you back. You discovered these brands maybe 5-6 years ago. Let them discover you back. Just lean in on that content, curate that content, tag them in that content. It's content you'd make anyways. Just acknowledge the brands that you're engaging with already. And I mean, I can't underscore the importance of being multifaceted in a streaming capacity. Like, letting people see layers of who you are is absolutely instrumental in being successful in this world. I just feel like there's so many brands that are waiting to break through, but they're looking for somebody who's going to represent them in a really clear way. And that might be you. Like, you might be the person who's already representing this brand, but you're not being vocal about it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing that Neffy and I have talked about a bunch before, and Rebecca, you and I have talked about, is if you are in the position where you're bringing a brand partner to a creator, you really want to be the person that knows the creator the best, because authenticity is huge, and you can really tell for most people. I mean, most content creators aren't professionally trained actors. They are people that act how they act, and that authentic personality is really how a lot of people connect. And it's one of the things that's made streaming so popular, is that you feel like you're friends with somebody that's on stream for 7-8 hours. And while you might not watch a full 7 or 8 hours, you might watch a couple minutes here and there, or look at their Twitter and see what they've promoted so far. And you can really tell. And that's the one thing that Neffy and I talk about all the time when we're talking to creators, or we're going through ideation of what brand might be best, is if someone if they grew up drinking Gamma Labs or G Fuel, and they're a big fan of like Rainbow Sherbet G Fuel, you can tell when they're on stream and they sip it and they're like, oh, dude, this stuff's really good. And that's kind of not even an ad read. That's just something they're doing, versus an ad read of something they don't know very well at all. And there are certain brands out there that just kind of cast a wide net. One of them is like NordVPN, that advertises with everybody, which I'm sure the space very much appreciates. But you can tell if someone's sipping G Fuel and they're like, man, this is really good, versus if they say, hey guys, check out VPN for your protection. And and they kind of stumble through an ad read, and you're people can tell. Yeah. And so, but at the same time, whoever is bringing those deals, it's incumbent upon them to really understand the creator. And I think that's the value that's the difference in value between someone entering esports to try and make a buck versus someone that's passionate about the growth of the space, is understanding the right place.
And I would say, like, being somebody who works very heavily in grassroots organizations, so diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, I'm a woman on your podcast, and I don't know, am I the first woman on your podcast? I can't think of any other woman that's been on your podcast.
Actually, now that you say it, I think so. Yeah, you are the first.
You are the first.
Yeah.
And
certainly not the last.
Congratulations, but you're definitely not going to be the last. That's a part. We're happy to have you to be the first. There definitely needs to be a lot more representation of women in esports, and we've noticed you've taken a huge lead on that end, and you've worked really hard on all fronts to try to make sure that women are included. I know it goes from carball to all that other stuff you've got going on, and we're really happy that you came on and you've spoken to us, and you're here representing, I guess, and I'm glad you point that out, because until you said that, Jake and I really, we didn't think about it. We kind of speak to people that
it just dawned on me as I was asking the question, honestly.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
It wasn't baked in. I was like, wait a minute. I think I might be the first woman on your podcast.
Yeah.
I would say the hardest thing from that aspect is a thing that I see all the time in RFPs. So when I get RFPs, and I am
Request
a woman
for
in
proposal.
gaming, and
Right.
and I'm the CEO of Women's Carball, which is the second largest women's esports league in the entire world. Just the whole world, no pressure.
No big
But one of the things that I see again and again is this statement, which is strict media measurement requirements. And these brands are saying that they have strict media measurement requirements that need to be met in order for a brand to engage with a property. So from a grassroots organization standpoint, whether you're Women's Carball or the Gamers or Community with an X or whatever grassroots org you are building out and leaning into in order to level the playing field, how can organizations like mine meet those requirements up against these legacy brands that are heavily funded by the publisher and distributors, with massive prize pools, with huge viewership numbers that are very male dominated? As a grassroots organization, like we've got our freaking backs against a wall. Mm-hmm. We're never going to meet a strict media measurement requirement when we're completely grassroots and underfunded. And like, one of the things that I think is really important to understand is the non-endemic brands really are the true heroes for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the esports ecosystem, because non-endemic brands are outsiders looking in and seeing the disparity and understanding how important it is to support people of color and women and disabled gamers in this space. And they're willing to put brand dollars towards that. And the endemic brands have been so focused on measuring org against org against org against org, which are very male dominated, with a lot of funding behind them, a lot of social media power in terms of those social media amplification dollars and media strategy. And we have never had the ability to do that as grassroots orgs. We've never had the funding to go toe to toe to create an elevated broadcast, to bring in top talent, to put social media dollars behind that, to push media dollars behind that. And I think, like, I just want to make sure that I don't underscore that in this conversation. Like, it's so critical to bring awareness to the fact that so many brands are measuring grassroots passion projects against top tier orgs that are fully funded. And it just puts people of color and women specifically at such a disadvantage of getting actual dollars. And I've said it quite a bit, but I'm really tired of the thoughts and prayers approach to women in gaming. Like, I'm so sick and tired of brands saying we really believe in women in gaming and then doing nothing substantial and putting no dollars behind helping women in this space, or their thoughts and prayers approach to HBCUs and people of color and schools who don't even have high-speed internet in disenfranchised communities throughout the United States, and saying we really support these communities. And it's like, we don't care about your thoughts and prayers. If you support these communities, look at what Verizon does. in these situations and back it with your dollars. Verizon has been a true hero of our industry in moving the needle forward for people of color. And it cannot be underscored how much they've done to move the needle forward for the HBCU community and what they've done for these kids across the United States, especially through the Southern United States, to make sure that they have access to competing at a high level. So when I take a look at an RFP and it says strict media measurement requirements, like I don't even want to waste my time and energy on that, because there's no way I'm going to go toe to toe with RLCS or other things when it comes to women's carball. There's just literally no way that I'm going to be able to compete with that. As a grassroots org that was created by a community of women who just want a safe place to compete in Rocket League without being harassed, right? And without, without being undermined or talked to like they don't matter. And being a mom of a 22-year-old daughter, like that is something that like I'll stand on my soapbox forever for. We just have to do better.
Will you explain women's carball just briefly for us so people out there who haven't heard of it can know?
Yeah, women's carball is it is the second largest women's esports league in the world. It's based in North America and the UK. It is basically a collection of women and those who identify as women who are competing at the highest level with each other in a safe environment in Rocket League. So we can't use the term Rocket League because we're not necessarily sanctioned to, although we're an official partner of Psyonix and the Rocket League Championship Series. We are not the official partner. So we kind of tread that line very carefully. But women's carball's been around for a number of seasons. And in June, I came on as their CEO to really determine a way that we can take this community of really hyper engaged Rocket League players that are women and get them closer to a pathway to the pros. So we did a rebrand this summer. We changed the entire format to really mirror RLCS. I think the way that we win with women's carball is to be a foundational pillar of Psyonix and RLCS, the way that collegiate Rocket League has evolved over the years to be truly a foundational pillar of Psyonix and RLCS. I believe that iron sharpens iron, and the best way to develop in skill is to play against the best.
Right.
And there are tried and true avenues to RLCS like Six Man, which maybe some of your listeners are familiar with. They're not the most welcoming to some of the women that are within my ecosystem. And so what we're trying to do is create a safe place for women where they're not met with some, sexual harassment, toxicity, whether it's sexual harassment or gender harassment or gender identity harassment. We just want these women to feel like there's a place for them to play.
Yeah.
And really hone in their skills against the best.
Yeah.
And the way that I feel like success for women's carball will be achieved is for more women within my organization to either play in RLCS or be casters, hosts, behind the scenes on the broadcast team, sound, stage, lighting, wherever it may be, signed with orgs as social media managers or sales team members. It's just about creating a really healthy pipeline to the next generation of women in esports through Rocket League. And my biggest vision as I'm building out the women's global esports leagues is to, really layer in other titles and create a comprehensive ecosystem for all women in competitive esports and gaming, whether that is competitors themselves or casters and content creators or in front offices, to be able to see women like me and understand that if I can do it, like a little farm kid with 1 year of college, if I can build this career for myself and be the CEO of Women's Carball, like there's a ton of space at the table. Like I
Right.
never felt like there was a space at the leadership table for me when I worked in the NBA. I want every young girl to know that there's a space at the table for her, and we're
Yeah.
going to build that space. And I'm here to help them grow and develop and be the best version of themselves. And as I like look at a picture of myself at like 8 years old in my Wonder Woman t-shirt, like flexing my muscles in my backyard, like that is the little girl that everything I do every single day when I wake up, I'm building that for her.
Right.
Cause it wasn't there for me. And it wasn't necessarily there for my 22-year-old daughter, but if it can be there for that next generation underneath, then that's my purpose. That's why I put my feet to the floor every single day.
Yeah, well, and speaking of platforms, I feel like that's going to be a great platform both for women's Rocket League and women's Carball to really grow, but also I can imagine a lot of brands will at some point be very attracted to that entire ecosystem. And I know there's some big things coming down the pipe, and we need to have you back on the podcast as soon
Yes.
as those can be announced. But I'm very excited for where you're headed as the CEO of Women's Carball.
Thank you.
And speaking of projects, you've said you're a thought leader, and I know we're getting towards the end of our upload parameters for the podcast, but you have done a lot of thought leadership. You have your own podcast, The Future of Marketing and Esports, which has had some great guests, including members of this podcast. You have spoken, you were on my panel at the Esports Trade Association Conference. You were on another panel at the Esports Trade Association Conference. You just spoke at the Elevate Conference. You're going to be speaking in Abu Dhabi soon. What's next coming down the pipe that you want people to know about, and what are ways that people can connect with you after this podcast is uploaded?
Yeah, I mean, I just I didn't grow up with the ability to see people who looked like me doing great things in sports. So I want young girls to be able to see my face and hear my voice and picture themselves in leadership positions in the gaming and esports ecosystem. Like if I can do that, then I've won. Then I'll like, I'll feel like everything that I've accomplished is quite worth it. I do have a podcast, The Future of Marketing and Esports. I talk to talented people like yourself, Jake, and other innovators in the space on how they
Dang,
are
you're gonna leave me out like that?
forward. Yeah, Neffy, you're next. Yeah, you're next. Yeah, I mean, women's Carball, a lot of times I hear male allies like yourselves reaching out and saying, how do we support this? It's really about like following women creators in the space, sharing their content, liking their content, talking about it, putting it on your LinkedIn. It's not a heavy lift. It's actually quite simple. So, like just stay abreast of what we're doing in women's Carball. I think we do have a ton of momentum when it comes to brands who understand the power of female consumers and women consumers holistically and really want to support women in gaming initiatives, and are going to, are willing to put their money where their mouth is. And the non-endemic brands, I believe, are the true heroes of esports and gaming for women and people of color in this space. So I'm really looking forward to some big announcements over the next few weeks. But yeah, if there's brands that are connected with your property that are like, want to get involved and really lean in and support the things that I'm building, I'd love to have conversations. I am R. Longawa on Twitter. I'm Women's Carball on everything Women's Carball related. Version1.gg on everything esports properties in Minnesota that I'm tied to. That's an organization that really, truly is dear to my heart. 60% of Version 1 staff are women. very entrenched in doing good in our local community as well. I can't say enough amazing things about the Wilf family who own the Vikings and Gary Vaynerchuk and what they've done for the Minnesota ecosystem when it comes to gaming and esports. So follow them as well. But I really appreciate you guys having me on and allowing me to have the microphone here and share my experiences. And I'm kind of stoked to be the first female guest on your podcast, honestly.
Well, we're happy to have you. Thank you so much for coming on. We're very excited to see what things you have coming in the pipeline, and you know, good luck in Abu Dhabi. And you know, I know you were working on that speech, and hopefully you get to finish and you get to talk for an hour and a half. So thank you so much. Thank you guys, everybody else has been listening and watching. I know this is a little bit on the longer side of our episodes, but I think Rebecca's provided a lot of insight that I think is very helpful and important in this particular environment that we live in the current day of esports. So thank you guys so much. Remember to feel free to follow Rebecca on Twitter. Feel free to follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Wait, no, we don't have a Snapchat. On TikTok.
We don't have a Snapchat. It's not your Tinder.
If you're watching this on YouTube, I did realize that I think it's like 93% of you guys watching videos are not subscribed. So I feel like a YouTuber, because I'm not a YouTuber, but I feel like a YouTuber when I say this. Please like and subscribe the video so it's recommended to other people to watch it. It really helps. And we talk about this thing with Rebecca specifically in regards to like statistics and numbers. It really helps us continue to produce a podcast. As you guys know, it's not cheap. We're getting new cameras, we're getting new mics, we're traveling around the country, doing things for work and then doing things for the podcast, and it really helps us. So thank you,
and
guys.
It makes us feel a lot better about ourselves whenever
it does.
I love your guys' podcast. So. I'm not joking. I love your guys' podcast. You guys bring on people that bring perspectives that I haven't even ever thought of, and I learn a lot. So all the hard hitting questions always from Neffy and Jake. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys on the next episode. Remember to follow, like, and subscribe, and thank you for listening.
See you guys.